The crystal glasses chimed with a delicate, expensive sound, a counterpoint to the low hum of self-congratulatory chatter that filled the private dining room of Aria, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't so much have a sign as a subtle, knowing whisper of its own name in brushed gold lettering on an unmarked door. This was Clara's choice, of course. For Ethan's promotion party, she had insisted on a venue that spoke the silent, fluent language of wealth and status, a language she understood far better than she understood the quiet, methodical man she called her husband. Ethan stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, the glittering cityscape of downtown spread below him like a carpet of fallen stars. He felt a detached sense of amusement. He had just been made senior architect at Sterling and Finch, a respectable, if somewhat creatively stagnant firm. To his colleagues, it was a significant step. To his wife and her family, it was the first tangible proof that their decade-long investment in him might finally yield a modest social dividend. To Ethan, it was the end of a chapter he had written for a very specific and very private purpose. His boss, a portly, good-natured man named Arthur Sterling, was winding down a toast. And in all my years, I've rarely seen an architect with such a combination of raw talent and rigorous discipline. Ethan is a true artist, but also a master craftsman. We are incredibly lucky to have him, and this promotion is long overdue. To Ethan! A chorus of, "To Ethan!" echoed through the room. Ethan smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. He appreciated Arthur. He appreciated his colleagues. He had enjoyed his work at the firm in its own way. He raised his glass, the perfectly weighted crystal cool against his fingers. "Thank you, Arthur. Thank you, everyone. It means the world." Then Clara moved to the center of the room, a vision in a silk dress the color of champagne. Her movements were fluid, confident, practiced. She picked up a fresh glass, tapping it lightly with a manicured nail for attention. The room fell silent, expectant. "I just want to add a few words," she began, her voice smooth and melodic. She smiled at Ethan, a brilliant, camera-ready smile that he knew was more for the audience than for him. "I've been with this man for 10 years. I met him when he was just starting out, full of big ideas and not much else." A few of her family members chuckled knowingly. Her father, Marcus Thorne, a man carved from granite and arrogance, gave a small, condescending smirk from his corner table. "My father," she continued, gesturing toward Marcus, "wasn't so sure about him. He saw a dreamer, and he worried. He wanted his daughter to have, well, stability." She paused for effect, letting the implication hang in the air. "But I saw something else. I saw a spark, a little flicker of potential that, with the right encouragement, the right support," her eyes scanned the room, landing on her father again. "And, let's be honest, the right connections might one day become a flame." The atmosphere in the room had begun to shift. The warm glow of celebration was cooling, replaced by a subtle, awkward tension. Ethan's colleagues shifted their weight, their smiles becoming fixed and uncertain. They were looking at Ethan, whose expression remained one of polite neutrality. He held his glass steady. He had known this was coming. Not the exact words, but the sentiment. It was the theme song of their marriage. Clara, wrapped in the impenetrable cloak of her own self-importance, was blind to the discomfort she was creating. She was on a roll, performing a monologue she had been rehearsing in her head for a decade. "It wasn't always easy," she said, her tone shifting to one of mock confessional intimacy. "There were times I wondered if I'd made a mistake, hitching my wagon to a star that might never quite leave the ground. All my friends were marrying bankers, lawyers, men who had their futures handed to them. And I chose the artist." She sighed, a theatrical exhalation of long-suffering virtue. "But I believed in him. I pushed him. I polished him." She raised her glass high, the champagne catching the light. "And tonight, it feels like it's all starting to pay off. I suppose, in the end," she concluded, her voice ringing with what she imagined was charming honesty, I'm just so proud that the man I settled for has finally started to prove me right. The words landed, not with a crash, but with the dead, final thud of a stone dropped into a deep well. Settled for. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking the air and the warmth from the room. Arthur Sterling's face was a mask of disbelief. Ethan's closest colleague, a young architect named Ben, looked physically ill on his behalf. The only sound was the faint, satisfied exhalation from Marcus Thorne. In that frozen moment, every eye was on Ethan. They saw a man publicly, exquisitely, humiliated by his own wife. They saw his career achievement reframed as her pet project. They saw his worth measured and found wanting, his success only validated as a return on her reluctant investment. They waited for him to shatter, to rage, to shrink. Ethan did none of those things. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his champagne, the taste of it turning to ash in his mouth. He met Clara's beaming, oblivious gaze. He held it for a long second, his own eyes revealing nothing but a calm, deep, and unnerving stillness. Then he offered her a small, tight nod. It was a gesture of finality, a closing of a door she didn't even know was ajar. She thought she had just defined him. She had no idea she had just liberated him. For all of you watching, I know that moment was hard to witness. Many of you have probably felt underestimated or unappreciated in your own lives. If this story is already resonating with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let's get back to what happened after that devastating speech, because the silence in that room was only the quiet before a storm that had been brewing for a decade. The party did not so much end as it dissolved, like a photograph left in the rain. The cheerful chatter bled away, replaced by murmured excuses and hasty, sympathetic glances toward Ethan. Arthur Sterling clapped him on the shoulder, his hand lingering. "Don't you pay that any mind, son," he said, his voice a low rumble of genuine anger. "We know your worth here. That was uncalled for." "Thank you, Arthur. Thank you for coming," Ethan replied, his voice even. He moved through the remnants of the gathering with a preternatural calm, a ship navigating the wreckage of a storm he had long seen on the horizon. He shook hands. He accepted the awkward, aborted congratulations. He was a master of holding a placid surface over turbulent waters. Clara, meanwhile, was basking in the afterglow of her performance. She floated from one of her family members to another, accepting their praise. "So brave of you to be so honest, darling," her aunt whispered. "It's important to keep these men humble," her cousin added with a wink. To them, this was normal. This was how their world worked. Men were prospects to be managed, assets to be cultivated. Clara had simply given a public report on her portfolio's performance. She was completely, blissfully unaware of the crater she had left in the center of the room. She saw the rapid departure of Ethan's colleagues not as a sign of their disgust, but as proof of their lower social stamina. The drive home was a study in silence. Ethan navigated his modest but well-maintained sedan through the glittering arteries of the city. He had offered to drive the car tonight, a choice Clara had scoffed at. "Honestly, Ethan, a valet for your own promotion party? We should have taken a town car. It's all about appearances." Now he was glad for the familiar feel of the leather-wrapped steering wheel under his hands. It was his, something real in a life that had become increasingly theatrical. Clara sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through photos from the party on her phone, humming a little tune. The silence didn't bother her. She assumed it was Ethan's usual quiet nature, perhaps tinged with a bit of embarrassment from her roast, as she would later call it. But for Ethan, the silence was a living thing. It was the space where 10 years of resentment had finally coalesced into a single, hard, unbreakable resolution. His mind was not replaying her speech. It was cataloging, with the cool precision of an architect reviewing a building's fatal flaws, every crack in the foundation of their marriage. He remembered the first time he'd taken her to see a site for a small community library he was designing early in his career. He had been so proud, so full of passion as he explained the flow of the space, the way the light would fall in the children's reading nook. She had listened with a patient smile, and when he was done, she'd patted his arm and said, "It's a cute little starter building, honey. Very quaint." The word had stung more than any overt criticism. It was a pat on the head, a dismissal of his ambition. He remembered a dinner with her friends, a collection of people whose net worth was their primary personality trait. He had been explaining the principles of sustainable design, a topic he was deeply committed to. In the middle of his sentence, Clara had laughed, a tinkling, dismissive sound. "Oh, listen to him," she'd said to the table. "He's so wonderfully artistic but so commercially clueless. Don't worry, I handle the checkbook." He had fallen silent, the thread of his thought and his dignity severed. Tonight was not an aberration, it was a summation. It was the final, undeniable piece of data in a decade-long study of his own life. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, the only outward sign of the immense pressure building inside him. He felt a familiar weight in the inner pocket of his suit jacket. His fingers twitched, wanting to touch it, to reassure himself of its reality. It was a single key. It was heavier than a normal key, forged from brushed nickel, with a clean, minimalist design. It was the key to a life Clara knew nothing about, a life he had built in the shadows of her condescension, a silent testament to the man he was, not the man she thought she was creating. The key was a promise, and tonight he was finally going to keep it. As he pulled the car into the driveway of the sprawling Tudor-style house that had always felt more like her family's embassy than his own home, he knew he was not just parking a car. He was positioning himself for the final, necessary act of demolition and reconstruction. The life they had shared was built on a faulty foundation, and Ethan, above all else, was an architect. He knew that some structures could not be saved. They had to be brought down to make way for something new, something true, something built to last. The history of their relationship was a blueprint of mismatched expectations. Ethan remembered their first meeting with a clarity that felt almost cruel now. It was at a gallery opening, a place he frequented for inspiration, a place she attended for social visibility. He had been standing before a large, abstract canvas, lost in the interplay of color and form, when she had approached him. "It's trying a little too hard, don't you think?" she'd said, her voice a confident melody. Ethan, pulled from his reverie, had turned. He saw a woman who radiated a kind of polished, effortless beauty. But it was her directness that had intrigued him. "I think," he'd responded, turning back to the painting, "it's trying to solve a problem, how to contain chaos within a defined structure. It's the fundamental question of architecture, really." She had looked at him then, truly looked at him, for the first time. "You're an architect?" That was the beginning. He was captivated by her energy, her sharp wit, her seemingly fearless navigation of the world. She, in turn, was fascinated by him. He was different from the men in her circle. He didn't talk about stock prices or quarterly earnings. He talked about light and space and how a building could shape the human experience. He was her exotic project, a man of substance in a world of surfaces. But the fascination soon revealed its true nature. It was the fascination of a collector with a rare but unpriced artifact. Her initial interest in his mind hardened into a constant, subtle evaluation of his market value. The courtship was a series of interviews disguised as dates. The apex of this vetting process was the first time he met her father. Marcus Thorne was a man who had built a real estate empire on ruthlessness and an unshakable belief in his own superiority. He viewed the world as a hierarchy, and he was firmly at the top. When Clara brought Ethan to the family estate for dinner, it felt less like an introduction and more like an appraisal. They sat in a dining room that could have comfortably hosted a state dinner. Marcus, at the head of the long, polished mahogany table, had ignored the polite small talk for all of 10 minutes before launching his interrogation. "So, Ethan," he'd begun, cutting into a piece of steak with surgical precision, "Clara tells me you're an architect. Sterling and Finch, is it? Solid firm, second tier but solid. What are your prospects there?" Ethan, then a junior architect with a portfolio of ambitious but largely unbuilt designs, had tried to answer honestly. "I'm learning a great deal, sir. I'm hoping to lead my own projects within the next 5 years." Marcus had grunted, a sound of profound unimpressiveness. Lead projects? And what's the pay scale on leading projects these days? Can it support my daughter in the manner to which she is accustomed? The question was so blunt, so transactional, it took Ethan's breath away. He looked to Clara for support, for an intervention, for any sign that she found this as crass as he did. She just sat there, her expression placid, watching the exchange as if it were a tennis match. She was the prize, and this was merely the qualifying round. She was a silent, complicit enabler. "I believe I can build a very good life for us, yes," Ethan had said, his voice tight. "Build," Marcus had scoffed, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "You build things on paper. I build things with steel and concrete and, most importantly, capital. Tell me, what's your capital, son, beyond your imagination?" The humiliation was a physical thing, a heat that rose in Ethan's cheeks. He had wanted to stand up and walk out. He had wanted to tell this arrogant old man that his own vision, his own talent, was a form of capital he couldn't possibly comprehend. But he had looked at Clara, and in her eyes he had seen a flicker of hope that he would pass this test, that he would prove himself worthy. And because he was in love, he had mistaken her hope for faith. So he stayed. He endured the rest of the dinner, a 2-hour ordeal of condescension and thinly veiled insults about his modest background. He left that night feeling diminished, but with Clara's hand in his. "Don't mind him," she'd said as he drove her home. "He's just protective. You'll win him over." He spent the next 10 years trying to do just that. He worked harder, longer hours. He took on side projects. He saved every penny. He thought that if he could just achieve a certain level of conventional success, they would finally see him. Not his bank account, but him. The man who had loved their daughter, the man who had a fire in his mind that could reshape skylines. He had tried, once, to show Marcus his true work. About 3 years into the marriage, he had secured a private commission, a radical, beautiful design for a coastal home. He had spent weeks on the renderings, pouring all of his talent into them. He brought the portfolio to a family dinner, his heart thrumming with a nervous pride. "Marcus, I wanted to show you something I've been working on," he'd said, unrolling the blueprints on a side table. Marcus had glanced at them for no more than 3 seconds. "Very nice, Ethan. A lot of glass. Must have a hell of a heating bill." He then turned to Clara's brother and started a conversation about a new golf course development. He hadn't even asked what it was. Ethan had stood there, his masterpiece ignored, his passion dismissed. He had slowly rolled up the blueprints, the crisp paper crackling in the silent room. He looked over at Clara. She gave him a small, pitying smile, as if to say, "Oh, you tried. How sweet." That was the night the strategy changed. He realized then that winning them over was impossible because the game was rigged. They didn't want him to succeed on his own terms. They wanted him to conform to theirs. From that day forward, his ambition went underground. He would continue to play the part of the diligent, slowly climbing employee at Sterling and Finch. But in the quiet hours of the night, in the sanctuary of his small home office, he would build his own kingdom, brick by silent brick. The house was cold when they entered, the kind of chill that comes from a space that is decorated but not lived in. It was a showpiece, a magazine spread. Every piece of furniture, every work of art had been chosen by Clara and her mother, a testament to their taste and their money. Ethan had long ago stopped seeing it as a home. It was a museum of his own inadequacy. Clara dropped her keys into a porcelain bowl with a clatter that echoed in the cavernous, marble-floored foyer. She finally seemed to register the wall of silence that had been radiating from Ethan since they'd left the restaurant. "All right, what is it?" she asked, kicking off her heels. She turned to face him, her arms crossed, her expression one of weary impatience. "Are you really going to be like this all night? It was a speech, Ethan. A little toast. People were laughing." "No, they weren't," Ethan said, his voice quiet but carrying an undeniable weight. "Arthur wasn't laughing. Ben wasn't laughing. My colleagues were not laughing. Your father was. That should tell you something." Clara rolled her eyes, a gesture of supreme dismissal. "Oh, for heaven's sake, don't be so sensitive. It was a joke, a little teasing. It's what people do when they're comfortable with each other. I was just being honest." "Honest," Ethan repeated the word, tasting it. "You think that was honesty?" "Yes, I'm proud of you, but I'm also not going to pretend you came from the same world as me. I took a chance on you, and it paid off. Why is that an insult? It's the story of us," she exclaimed, her hands gesturing wide as if to encompass the grand, romantic narrative she had constructed in her mind. Ethan didn't answer. He walked past her, his footsteps unnervingly steady on the polished floor. He went down the hall to his study, the one room in the house that was truly his. It was small, a converted guest bedroom, but it was his sanctuary. The walls were lined not with the bland, decorative art from the rest of the house, but with his own architectural sketches, framed articles on urban design, and photographs of buildings by Wright and Gehry and Zaha Hadid. It was a room dedicated to the work they all dismissed. He closed the door behind him, but didn't lock it. He wanted her to follow. He needed this to happen here, in the heart of his real life. He sat down at his large oak desk, the surface of which was a stark contrast to the rest of their pristine home. It was a landscape of organized chaos, stacks of books, rolls of blueprints, colored pens in a jar, and a sleek, powerful computer humming quietly. But tonight, cleared to the center of the desk, was a different set of materials. There was a thick, leather-bound portfolio. Next to it, a stack of neatly printed financial statements held together with a simple black clip. Beside that, a set of official-looking incorporation documents. And on top of it all, a single, heavy nickel key. This was the arsenal he had been assembling for years. His secret life, codified in paper and metal. The job at Sterling and Finch had been a godsend, but not for the reasons Clara thought. It provided a steady, respectable income that kept her and her family satisfied, or at least quiescent. It was his cover. It allowed him to operate in plain sight. While he was putting in his 40 hours a week designing respectable but uninspired office parks for Arthur Sterling, he was spending another 40 hours at night and on weekends building his own empire. He had started it 5 years ago, a design firm with a deliberately anonymous name, Keystone Design Group. He had been the sole employee, the founder, the lead architect, the accountant, the janitor. He had poured all the money he'd saved, all the earnings from his early side projects into it. His first commission was the cute little starter building, the coastal home he tried to show Marcus. The client had been a tech millionaire who valued vision over a famous name. That project, when completed, had won a prestigious architectural award. Because Keystone was anonymous, the press had focused only on the work itself. The mystery architect became a story. More clients came, wealthy, discerning clients who wanted art, not just buildings. They didn't care that he was working out of a spare bedroom. They cared about the portfolio. Ethan picked up the financial statements. The promotion at Sterling and Finch came with a salary of $180,000 a year. A fine salary, the one he and Clara lived on, the one Marcus Thorne scoffed at. He flipped to the last page of the Keystone Design Group's annual report. The net profit for the previous fiscal year was just over $7 million. The firm's total valuation, based on current projects and assets, was conservatively estimated at $50 million. The promotion wasn't a milestone, it was a trigger. It was the last data point he needed, the final confirmation that no matter what he achieved within their limited frame of reference, he would always be the charity case, the man she settled for. He had waited for this moment, not with malice, but with a growing, sorrowful certainty. He had given her 10 years to see him. She had failed. The doorknob turned, the door swung open. Clara stood there, her face a thundercloud of indignation. "Are you seriously going to ignore me? I'm your wife. My father is on the phone. He wants to congratulate you again. He thought my speech was hilarious. He said it was about time someone put you in your place a little." That was it. The final, perfect, damning piece of evidence. Ethan looked up from the documents, his face a mask of calm. The storm was no longer on the horizon. It was in the room. He turned in his chair to face her fully, the movement slow, deliberate, final. "Clara," he said, his voice so quiet it was more terrifying than a shout. "We need to talk." Clara's annoyance flickered into confusion. She had never heard this tone from him before. It was devoid of the usual undercurrent of gentle deference she had come to expect. This was the voice of a stranger, a man who held all the cards and was finally ready to play them. "Talk about what?" she asked, her arms still crossed, a defensive posture against a threat she couldn't yet identify. "About you being overly dramatic about a little joke?" "Let's start with a question," Ethan said, ignoring her barb. He leaned forward slightly, his hands resting flat on the desk on either side of the leather portfolio. The verbal chess match had begun, and he had just made his opening move. "Were you happy for me tonight, Clara?" The question seemed to throw her. "Of course I was happy. What a ridiculous thing to ask. I threw you a party at the most expensive restaurant in the city. Does that seem like something an unhappy wife does?" She gestured vaguely, as if the cost of the evening was irrefutable proof of her emotional state. "That's not what I asked," Ethan pressed, his voice still unnervingly calm. "I didn't ask if you threw a party. I asked if you were happy for me, for my achievement." "Yes, Ethan, for you, for us. What's the difference?" she said, her exasperation growing. "This promotion is good for us. It's a step up. We can finally start looking at a summer place in the Hamptons without having to ask my father for help. We can upgrade the car. We can—" "So you were happy about what my promotion could do for you?" he stated. It wasn't an accusation. It was a clarification, delivered with the dispassionate air of a scientist observing a predictable chemical reaction. This was the moral mirror, and he was holding it up to her, forcing her to see the reflection she had so carefully avoided for a decade. "That's not fair," she shot back, stung. "It's for both of us. A rising tide lifts all boats, doesn't it?" "It does," Ethan agreed softly, "but only if both people are in the same boat. I'm beginning to think we haven't been for a very long time. You've been on a luxury yacht, occasionally looking down to see if my little rowboat was keeping up." The architectural metaphor, his native language, was lost on her. She only heard the criticism. "Oh, here we go. Poor, sensitive Ethan. The misunderstood artist. I have supported you for 10 years. I have stood by you while you were making practically nothing, while all my friends were living in mansions. I believed in you." "Did you?" he asked, the question a soft, penetrating probe. "Did you believe in me, or did you believe in your ability to mold me into something you could present to your father? There's a difference." "You're twisting everything," she said, her voice rising in pitch. She took a step into the room, now fully on the defensive. "This is because of my speech, isn't it? You can't handle a little public honesty. My God, you're weak." The word weak hung in the air between them. 10 years ago, it would have crushed him. A year ago, it would have wounded him. Tonight, it was meaningless. It was a label from a person who had no idea what she was looking at. "Weakness is a matter of perspective, Clara," he said. He finally broke his steady gaze and looked down at his desk. "Let's talk about that honesty you value so much. Let's be truly honest for a moment." He gestured to the chair opposite his desk, a silent command. For the first time in their marriage, she obeyed without thinking, sinking into the leather visitor's chair as if her legs could no longer support her. She was on his territory now, a guest in the only part of their house and their life that he truly controlled. He leaned back, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to her agitated state. The power dynamic in the room had fundamentally, irrevocably shifted. She had come in here to scold a sulking husband. She was now facing a judge. "Let's be honest," he repeated. "The party tonight wasn't for me. It was for you. It was a chance for you to publicly validate your own judgment, to show your world that your long-shot investment was finally showing a small profit." "That's a horrible thing to say." "Is it untrue?" he countered. "Tell me, honestly, when you said you settled for me, what did you mean?" She stammered, for the first time at a loss for words. It was just a phrase, an expression." "No," he said, cutting her off, but without raising his voice. "It was the most honest thing you've said to me in years. You meant you chose beneath your station. You chose a man with no family money, no connections, no clear path to the wealth you believe is a birthright. You settled for talent and integrity, hoping you could eventually trade it in for a better car and a house in the Hamptons. That's the truth, isn't it?" She stared at him, her mouth slightly agape. He had taken the narrative she had so carefully crafted and held it up to the light, revealing it for the cheap, flimsy thing it was. The silence stretched, and in that silence her entire defense crumbled. The calm in the room was the deceptive peace of a floodplain just before the dam breaks. Clara, sensing her usual tactics were failing, reached for a more potent weapon: anger. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "After everything I've done for you, the doors I've opened, the people I've introduced you to, you would have been nothing without me and my family. You'd still be designing cute little starter buildings in some suburban wasteland." Ethan's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. She had just handed him the exact ammunition he needed. He had been waiting for that phrase. "The cute little starter building," he repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "Let's talk about that. It was the Jennings house in Montauk. You called it quaint. You know who the client was? Robert Jennings, the founder of a billion-dollar software company. He didn't care about my firm's name. He cared about the design. That quaint house won the National Architectural Guild's gold medal for residential design. It was featured on the cover of Architectural Digest, anonymously, of course." Clara stared at him, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "What are you talking about? You never won an award like that." "No," Ethan said, "I didn't. Keystone Design Group did." He had begun. The list of grievances was being read into the record, and each item was a brick being methodically removed from the wall of her ignorance. "Let's talk about the time you called me commercially clueless in front of your friends," he continued, his tone relentlessly even. "That was the night after I had just closed the deal on the Helios Tower project, a 50-story mixed-use skyscraper downtown. The client, a European investment consortium, had been trying to find an architect who could solve a complex zoning and engineering problem. They didn't go to Sterling and Finch. They didn't go to any of the big names. They came to the unknown Keystone Design Group because we had a solution no one else could see." He was speaking a foreign language to her. Helios Tower was one of the most talked-about new developments in the city. Her own father had complained for months about being outbid for the construction contract by a rival. The idea that Ethan, her Ethan, was connected to it was simply impossible. It didn't compute. "You're not making any sense," she said, shaking her head as if to clear it. "You work at Sterling and Finch. You design office parks." "That's my day job," Ethan said. "It has been, for the last 5 years, my research. A way to understand the market, to see my competitors' methods from the inside, all while drawing a perfectly respectable salary that kept everyone satisfied." The weight of his words was beginning to press down on her. The structure of her reality was groaning under the strain. "And tonight," he said, bringing the list to its devastating conclusion. Tonight you stood up in a room full of my peers, my mentors, and the junior architects who look up to me, and you told them that my entire career was your project. You told them that our marriage was an act of your charity. You didn't just insult me, Clara. You invalidated every late night, every sacrifice, every ounce of passion I have ever poured into my work. You tried to claim ownership of my soul simply because you pay for the house it sleeps in. She started, but no words came out. The truth of his accusation was absolute, irrefutable. She fell back on her last, most reliable defense, the one she had used subtly for years. The threat of abandonment. The belief that he was fundamentally dependent on her. "Fine," she snapped, her voice brittle with a rage born of fear. "If this is how you feel, if you have this little gratitude for the life I've given you, then maybe this isn't working. Maybe you should just go." It was meant to be a threat, a checkmate, the move that would force him to back down, to apologize, to be the grateful, compliant man she needed him to be. Ethan nodded slowly, his expression one of profound, sorrowful agreement. "I agree, Clara. It isn't working." He stood up, his tall frame seeming to fill the small study. He walked not towards her, but around the desk, to the door. "I'm not the one who will be going." Her jaw dropped. "What? Don't be ridiculous. This is my family's house. You can't afford this place on your little senior architect salary." She laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Where would you even go, Ethan? Back to your tiny bachelor apartment?" This was the moment, the pivot point upon which his entire life was about to turn. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw a glimmer of pity in his eyes. He walked back to his desk, picked up the single, heavy, brushed nickel key, and placed it gently on the polished wood in front of her. "You're right," he said, his voice calm and clear. "I can't afford this house. I never wanted it, which is why 6 months ago I paid cash for another one." He then reached down and slid the thick, leather-bound portfolio across the desk toward her. "You dismissed my work as cute. You called me commercially clueless. You thought my ambition was a hobby." He tapped the cover of the portfolio. "This is my hobby, Clara. This is Keystone Design Group. My company. The one I own. The one I built. The one your father has been desperately trying to get a meeting with for the last year." The dam didn't just break, it vaporized. Clara stared at the key, then at the portfolio, her mind refusing to connect the pieces of this impossible puzzle. Her reality, the one in which she was the patron and he was the project, was disintegrating before her eyes. "No," she whispered. It was a sound of pure denial, a child's refusal to accept the monster under the bed is real. "That's not possible. You're lying." "Am I?" Ethan replied, his voice devoid of triumph. He sounded tired. He opened the portfolio for her to the first page. It was the cover of Architectural Digest, the one featuring the cute house in Montauk. Below the stunning photograph, the caption read, "A masterpiece of light and form by the enigmatic Keystone Design Group." He turned the page. It was a feature from the Financial Times about the Helios Tower. It detailed the massive 9-figure budget and praised the genius, anonymous architect who had solved the unsolvable design problem. He turned the page again and again. Project after project. A breathtaking museum in Dubai. A sustainable corporate campus in Silicon Valley. A series of luxury minimalist homes in Aspen. A portfolio of work so brilliant, so successful, it was staggering. And then he slid the financial statements across the desk. He didn't need to point anything out. Her eyes, so accustomed to scanning for bottom lines, went right to the final page. She saw the numbers, the revenue, the profits, the asset valuation. Numbers that didn't just dwarf his Sterling and Finch salary, but made her own family's considerable wealth look like pocket money. The color drained from her face. The woman who valued everything in dollars and cents was finally confronted with a number so large it broke her brain. The man she had settled for was not just successful. He was not just wealthy. He was a titan, operating on a level she couldn't even comprehend. He hadn't been rowing a little boat next to her yacht. He had been piloting a nuclear submarine, running silent and deep beneath her, and she had been utterly, laughably oblivious. "The job at Sterling and Finch," he explained, his voice now gentle, as if speaking to a trauma victim. "I took it because they are your father's primary architectural partner. I needed to understand their fee structures, their workflow, their weaknesses. It was market research, Clara. The promotion you celebrated tonight, it was irrelevant. I was planning to resign next week anyway." The edifice of her life, her superiority, her entire sense of self, collapsed into dust. She looked at him, at this stranger who had been living in her house for 10 years. The quiet, sensitive artist was gone. In his place was a master strategist, a man of terrifying patience and discipline, a king who had been living disguised as a court jester. Her phone began to ring, the cheerful, chirping tone grotesquely out of place. She looked at the screen. It was her father. Ethan gestured towards a phone. "Answer it," he said quietly. I believe he was calling to laugh about putting me in my place. Numbly, she swiped to answer, her hand trembling. She put the phone to her ear, unable to speak. "Clara!" Marcus Thorne's booming voice filled the silence. "Is your husband done sulking yet?" "Ha! Just calling to congratulate my boy again on his little step up the ladder. Tell him not to get a big head now. He's still a long way from the big leagues." Ethan reached out and calmly took the phone from her unresisting fingers. He put it on speakerphone, the sound of Marcus's self-satisfied chuckle filling the study. "Marcus," Ethan said, his voice cutting through the laughter like a shard of ice. "It's Ethan." The chuckling stopped abruptly. "Ethan, good, good. Just having a bit of fun. No hard feelings, eh?" "No hard feelings at all, Marcus," Ethan replied smoothly. "In fact, I'm glad you called. Clara and I were just discussing my other company. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's called Keystone Design Group." A profound, bottomless silence emanated from the phone. Ethan could practically hear the gears grinding in Marcus Thorne's arrogant mind, the pieces clicking into a horrifying new picture. "I believe your executive assistant, a very persistent woman named Diane, has been trying to get a meeting with me for the past 6 months," Ethan continued, "regarding the waterfront revitalization project. You should know I awarded the construction contract to Henderson Corp this afternoon. Their bid was more innovative." The silence stretched for 5, 10, 15 seconds. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was a strangled whisper. What did you say?" At that precise, exquisitely timed moment, the doorbell rang. The clear, pleasant chime cut through the suffocating tension in the room. Clara jumped, startled. Ethan didn't even flinch. "Excuse me, Marcus," he said into the phone. "That would be my 8 o'clock appointment." He looked at Clara, his eyes holding that same unnerving pity. "It's Mr. Harrison. You remember him, the developer from that charity board you're on. He's here to sign the final papers for the new City Art Museum. Another Keystone project. I'll call you back." He hung up the phone on Marcus Thorne's stunned silence. The name Harrison landed like another shockwave. James Harrison was not just a developer, he was a legend, a man who built global landmarks. Clara had spent 6 months trying to get a 5-minute conversation with him at a charity gala. And he was here, at her house, at 8 o'clock on a Friday night, for Ethan. The illusion wasn't just shattered, it was atomized. Every pillar of Clara's world, her status, her wealth, her superior judgment, her family's power, had been revealed as a cheap facade in the face of the silent, colossal reality of the man she had just publicly pitied. The doorbell chimed again, a polite, patient sound. "I should get that," Ethan said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. He started to walk out of the study, leaving Clara alone with the ruins of her life. The breakdown was not immediate. It came in stages, like a building collapsing in on itself. First there was shock, a complete cognitive paralysis. Clara stared at the empty doorway through which Ethan had disappeared, her mind a howling void. Nothing made sense. The man who apologized when she criticized his choice of tie was the same man who had just hung up on her formidable father. The man she thought couldn't afford a new car was signing nine-figure deals in their study. Then came the sound of voices from the foyer, Ethan's calm, low tones, and another, deeper voice, warm and respectful. James Harrison's voice. She could hear them talking about blueprints, about materials. It was the easy, fluent camaraderie of two equals, two masters of their respective universes. That sound, the sound of Ethan's belonging in a world she could only press her nose against the glass of, is what finally broke her. A sob escaped her lips, a raw, ragged sound of pure loss. It wasn't a loss of love. It was a loss of context, a loss of status. The terrifying, vertiginous feeling of realizing you have been the fool in a story where you thought you were the hero. She stumbled out of the study and saw them in the foyer. Ethan and James Harrison, a man whose picture was regularly in Forbes, were leaning over a large architectural drawing spread across the marble-topped console table. Harrison was nodding, his face alight with enthusiasm. "It's brilliant, Ethan. Truly. The way you've handled the light in the main atrium. It's genius. Pure genius." Ethan looked up and saw her. His expression didn't change. He simply nodded a polite acknowledgement, as if she were a distant acquaintance. "Mr. Harrison, you remember my wife Clara?" Harrison turned and smiled warmly. "Mrs. Thorne, a pleasure to see you again. Your husband is a genuine visionary. I count myself lucky to be working with him." The name. He had called her Mrs. Thorne. Ethan had always insisted they use his last name, Davies, but Clara had kept her more prestigious maiden name professionally and socially. To hear Harrison use it now felt like a branding, a separation. She was a thorn. He was the visionary. You, she stammered, looking at Ethan. The apologies began to bubble up, born not of remorse, but of sheer, panicked desperation. "Ethan, we need to talk. I didn't know. You never told me. We can fix this. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I'm so sorry." The words tumbled out, a frantic, incoherent plea. She was apologizing for her speech, for her ignorance, for a decade of condescension, but most of all, she was apologizing for her catastrophic misjudgment. She had thrown away a winning lottery ticket because she hadn't bothered to scratch it. Ethan listened, his face a mask of sorrowful patience. He let her exhaust her frantic energy. When she finally fell silent, tears streaming down her face, he spoke. "The point is, Clara," he said, his voice imbued with a profound weariness, "that it shouldn't have mattered." He took a step towards her, closing the distance between them. Harrison, sensing the deep, personal gravity of the moment, quietly busied himself with the blueprints. "My worth as your husband," Ethan continued, his voice low, and for her ears only. "My value as the man you chose to build a life with should not have been conditional on a bank statement you never knew existed. Whether I made $50,000 a year or $50 million, I was the same man. The man who loved you, the man who tried for 10 years to be worthy of your respect. Not your pity, your respect." He paused, letting the truth of his words sink in. "You didn't settle for me. You failed to see me. And there is no apology that can fix a decade of blindness." Just then, the front door burst open without a knock. Marcus Thorne stood there, his face pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of fury and desperation. He ignored his weeping daughter completely. His eyes were locked on Ethan. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice a hoarse rasp. He strode into the foyer, his gaze flicking from Ethan to James Harrison and back again. The sight of the legendary developer in this house, with Ethan, only confirmed his worst fears. "Marcus," Ethan said, his tone turning from sorrowful to glacial, "this is a private meeting, and you are trespassing." Marcus flinched as if struck. He who was used to striding into any room he pleased was being dismissed like a common intruder. He quickly recalibrated, his businessman's brain taking over. This was no longer his unimpressive son-in-law. This was the principal of Keystone Design Group. This was a power player. "Son," he said, forcing a sickly smile, "let's not be hasty. There's been a misunderstanding, a big one. My fault. Your wife, she's emotional. You know how women are." He waved a dismissive hand at Clara, as if she were a piece of faulty furniture. The gesture was so callously revealing that it made even Clara gasp. In that moment, she saw her father with perfect, horrifying clarity. She was not his beloved daughter. She was an asset, a pawn, and in this new game, she had proven to be a liability. "We can be partners, Ethan," Marcus continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "Keystone and Thorn Industries. We could dominate this city. The waterfront project. It's not too late. We can make Henderson Corp disappear. Whatever you want. A 50-50 split. 60-40. You name your price." Ethan looked at the desperate, grasping man before him. The man who had mocked his dreams, insulted his background, and treated him with nothing but contempt for 10 years. And he felt nothing. Not anger, not triumph. Just a vast, empty distance. He turned his back on Marcus. He looked at Clara, at her tear-streaked, devastated face. He saw the flicker of understanding in her eyes as she watched her father try to sell her out to save a business deal. "I've had my lawyer book you a suite at the Four Seasons for the next month," he said to her, his voice softening once more. "Take the time. Think about what you want. Think about who you are without the Thorn name. My driver will take you whenever you're ready." He then turned to Marcus. "As for you, our business is concluded." He gestured to the open door. It was a silent, unmistakable command. "Leave." Marcus Thorn, a man who had never been dismissed in his life, stood frozen for a moment, his face contorting in a mask of rage and disbelief. Then, with a strangled cry of frustration, he turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The boom echoed in the foyer. Clara was left standing between two men, the stranger she had been married to for a decade, and the powerful developer who represented a world she had just been irrevocably locked out of. She had made her choice that night with her speech, and she was just beginning to understand the consequences. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in controlled demolition and swift reconstruction. Ethan's resignation from Sterling and Finch sent a ripple of shock through the firm, but it was nothing compared to the seismic event that followed. The next day, a press release, coordinated with a feature in the Wall Street Journal, revealed that Ethan Davies, the quiet senior architect, was the founder and visionary behind the celebrated Keystone Design Group. The mystery was solved, and a new star was minted in the architectural firmament overnight. The fallout for the Thorn family was immediate and catastrophic. Marcus Thorn, who had built his reputation on being the most powerful real estate player in the city, was now publicly known as the man who had the legendary Ethan Davies in his own family and had been too blind to see it. Worse, he was the man who had been trying and failing for a year to get a meeting with his own son-in-law. He became a laughingstock in the circles he once dominated. His rivals, like Henderson Corp., now emboldened by their partnership with Keystone, began to poach his contracts and his key people. The Thorn empire, built on a foundation of arrogant pride, began to crumble. Ethan insulated himself from the chaos. He moved out of the Tudor house the day after the party, leaving everything behind but his clothes and the contents of his study. He moved into the house he had built for himself, a stunning, minimalist structure of glass, steel, and warm cedar, perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean just outside the city. It was a space that was the physical manifestation of his mind, clean, ordered, filled with light, and possessing a quiet, unshakable strength. For the first time in 10 years, he felt at home. His work flourished. No longer needing to operate in the shadows, He and Keystone took on projects with an even greater sense of freedom and ambition. The New City Art Museum, his project with James Harrison, became his focus. It was a legacy project, a chance to give back to the city that had, in its own way, forged him. Clara, in her gilded cage at the Four Seasons, experienced a different kind of reality. For the first time in her life, she was truly alone. The calls from her friends dwindled to nothing once the news broke. They had been friends with her status, not with her, and her status was now toxic. Her father, consumed by his collapsing business and his own wounded pride, barely spoke to her. He blamed her. "You had a king in your hand and you threw him away like a common card," he had screamed at her during their one and only phone call. Stripped of her social armor, her wealth, and the validation she had always taken for granted, Clara was forced to look at herself. She spent days replaying her marriage in her mind, but this time through Ethan's eyes. She remembered all the small cuts, the dismissive words, the condescending smiles, the cute little starter building, the commercially clueless comment, and finally the speech, "The man I settled for." She saw her words not as a joke, but as an act of profound cruelty, made all the more cruel by the fact that she hadn't even realized it. Her arrogance had been a blindfold, and now that it was removed, the glare of her own character was painful to behold. She understood what Ethan meant. His success shouldn't have mattered. His secret wealth wasn't the point. The point was that she had failed a fundamental test of love and partnership. To see the person beside you for who they are, not for what they can provide. 1 month to the day after the party, Ethan received a formal-looking envelope from Clara's lawyer. He expected divorce papers. Instead, it was a single sheet of paper, a quitclaim deed. She was signing over her interest in the Tudor house and any other marital assets, asking for nothing. Tucked inside was a handwritten note, not on her usual embossed stationery, but on a simple piece of hotel notepaper. It read, "Ethan, you were right about everything. I am so sorry. Not for what I lost, but for what I was never able to see. I hope you find someone who is worthy of you. Clara." There was no plea, no justification, just a simple, stark admission. It was the first truly honest communication she had ever sent him. Ethan read the note and felt not triumph, but a wave of melancholy peace. The war was over. There were no winners, only survivors. He had survived with his integrity and his future intact. She, he hoped, would survive with a newfound and hard-won sense of self. He placed the note on his desk, next to the heavy, brushed nickel key to this new life. The key no longer felt like a weapon or a secret. It just felt like a key to a door he had been brave enough to walk through, a door that led home. Several months later, the world had settled into its new shape. Ethan Davies was no longer just an architect, he was a phenomenon. His story, the story of the underestimated genius, had captured the public imagination. But he ignored the media circus, focusing his entire energy on his work, finding solace and purpose in the clean lines and ambitious structures he created. His firm, Keystone, became a beacon for young, brilliant architects who were drawn not just to his success, but to his integrity. He was in his office, a spacious, light-filled studio overlooking the construction site of the new museum, when his assistant informed him he had a visitor. "A Miss Thorne is here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment." Ethan paused, a charcoal pencil held motionless over a sketch. He hadn't seen or spoken to Clara since she had sent the note. He had heard through the grapevine that she had sold her expensive car and jewelry, moved into a modest apartment downtown, and taken an entry-level job at a nonprofit arts foundation. She had, for the first time, stepped out from under the shadow of her family's name and money. "Send her in," he said. Clara entered the office. She looked different. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple, professional dress. Her hair was styled more naturally. The biggest change was in her eyes. The old arrogance, the restless need for approval, was gone. In its place was a quiet, sober stillness. She looked like a person who had been through a fire and had come out the other side changed, stripped down to her essential self. "Ethan," she said, her voice steady, "thank you for seeing me. I know I have no right to be here." "Clara," he replied, gesturing to a chair, "please." She didn't sit. She remained standing, as if she didn't feel she had earned the right to be comfortable in his space. "I'm not here to ask for anything," she began. "Not for forgiveness, not for a second chance. I know I don't deserve either. I'm here to finish the conversation." She took a deep breath. "For my entire life, I was taught to measure worth in numbers. The price of a dress, the square footage of a house, the balance in an account. I measured you that way. I saw your talent, but I saw it as a commodity, something I could invest in. I didn't see your heart. I didn't see your character. That night at the party, when I said I settled for you, the horrible, ironic truth is that you settled for me. You, a man of substance and integrity, settled for a shallow, scared woman who was terrified of not living up to her father's expectations." Her confession was unsparing, her self-awareness absolute. It was the moral mirror, but this time she was holding it up to herself. "I spent my whole life trying to be a thorn," she continued, a sad smile on her face. "And I'm just now learning how to be Clara. I'm working. I'm paying my own rent. It's terrifying, and it's the best thing that has ever happened to me. I just wanted you to know that, and I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" Ethan asked, genuinely surprised. "Yes," she said. "You could have destroyed me. You could have humiliated me, taken your revenge. But you didn't. You were firm, but you were kind. You gave me a soft place to land, and then you gave me the dignity of letting me go. You showed me what real strength looks like. It isn't about power or money, it's about integrity." She had finally learned the lesson, not because she had lost her status, but because she had witnessed his grace. Ethan stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the rising steel skeleton of the museum. "I didn't do it for you, Clara," he said softly, honestly. "I did it for me. Holding on to anger is like building a house with rotten wood. It will inevitably collapse. I wanted to build something strong." He turned back to her. "I'm glad you're finding your way." The words hung in the air, an acknowledgement of her journey, but not an invitation back into his. The respect she had craved from him for a decade, she had finally earned, but only after they were no longer together. It was a poetic, painful justice. "Goodbye, Ethan," she said, her voice thick with emotion. She turned and walked out of his office and out of his life. Ethan watched her go, a chapter finally, truly closed. He felt a sense of closure, of a painful but necessary story reaching its rightful end. He was free, not just from a toxic marriage, but from the need for anyone else's approval. His worth was not determined by a paycheck, a promotion, a wife's praise, or a father-in-law's respect. It was in the work of his hands, the integrity of his heart, and the quiet, unshakable knowledge of who he was. He looked out the window again. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the city. But on the highest crane of his construction site, a single light blinked on, a beacon against the falling darkness. It was a promise of what was to come. A new day, a new structure, a future he had built himself. The story of Ethan and Clara is a powerful reminder that our true value is not something that can be given to us or taken away by others. It's not measured by our job title, our bank account, or the approval of those around us. True worth is intrinsic. It's built on a foundation of integrity, self-respect, and the courage to be true to ourselves, even when no one else is watching. Ethan's greatest victory wasn't revealing his wealth. It was reclaiming his dignity without sacrificing his character. What do you think? Have you ever been in a situation where you felt underestimated? How did you handle it? Let us know your stories and your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. And if this story of vindication and self-discovery resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more content that explores the complexities of human relationships and the quiet triumphs of the human spirit. Thank you for watching.